Okay, so any questions? Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, I will make a bit of a start. Hopefully everyone else will get the link soon and we'll have some more people joining us. Sorry for the delay, sorry for the tech issues and stuff. Okay, thank you for confirming that you can hear me and for joining me over here. And I'll get started. I'll possibly start with, I'm trying to think who we've got here. So we've, I think I'll start with the Newstead content. And then for those that are here, then we'll go on to the other schools. So just to let you know what is coming up. Okay, so I'll go over the exams, the basic content for the local exams in the Kent area, homework and practice papers, just some tips and timings on that sort of thing, mock test briefly, like how many mock tests you should do and which ones, summer preparation, and then I'll be opening up for questions. But if you have any questions related to the slides that I have on, do feel free to type them in the question box and I'll try and answer them as I go along. Okay, so what have I got here? Oh, yes. And I have a little reminder here. I'm sure a lot of you will know this, but just in case. So as you can see, a little reminder that the reason that you aim for a grammar school is so that your child reaches their full potential at secondary school. But there's more than one way to achieve that. So I think in preparing for grammar schools, we can get very focused on the 11 plus as an endpoint and as the goal, but we do want to work with you, especially if you're a keen learning customer, and make sure that your child is going to be set up for success in the long term at that school, not just getting past the exam and then they potentially struggle while they're there. So different grammar schools have different cultures. Some of them will be harder than others. So just making sure that your child is going to a school that is the right fit for them is so important, rather than just focusing on things like school rankings. Talk about that a little bit as well. Okay, so Newstead Wood, first up. So the content, I'm sure most of you know, it's 50% verbal reasoning and 50% non-verbal reasoning, that exam. The core skills required, so obviously apart from just getting the questions right, what helps with Newstead prep is a natural aptitude for reasoning. The reason I say that is because although practice massively improves results, and there are exam techniques and methods that that we can impart on the children and to help them to improve. Just having that natural ability does make a huge difference. And Newstead in particular, their exam is very close to just an aptitude test, whereas others, they are perhaps a bit more prescriptive, and if you cover off those topics, then you'll be okay. Newstead, it's partly just comes down to natural ability, well, largely. One thing I will say that I tell the children every year is that for some reason, everyone comes out of the Newstead exam and says that the exam was easy, whether they end up passing or failing. And this was the same the year I took the Newstead exam. For some reason, everyone says it's easy. So unfortunately, it's not an indicator of how they've done. I think it seems deceptively easy from the looks of it. So apart from your reasoning aptitude, you will need a strong vocabulary. The students that have gone to Newstead over the years from us have always had a really strong vocab. Often they're readers, but sometimes that's come through other means. They need the ability to work quickly. The timing in the Newstead exam works out at 30 seconds per question for both verbal and non-verbal reasoning. So that's what we work to in class. And they should have good problem-solving ability. So even outside of verbal reasoning papers and non-verbal reasoning, the Newstead girls tend to have good maths problem-solving ability. That seems to help for some reason, being good at maths. And they're typically the kind of child that can see a problem that perhaps doesn't look that familiar, but they can solve it using past knowledge, and they're able to apply that, that knowledge really well. The catchment area for Newstead is 9 miles. So just double check that you are within the catchment if you live a bit further away from Orpington. And then reputation and rankings. So Newstead still does very well in the rankings. Because it's historically done very well, I think sometimes people still assume that it's the best girls' school in the county. That definitely used to be the case 15 years ago. Now, sometimes the Tunbridge schools will outdo Newstead in rankings a little bit based on GCSE performance. So don't just assume that it's the top school. Just a quick one, reputation-wise, is that I know a lot of people have concerns about Newstead and applying pressure to the girls and mental health problems and that sort of thing. From what I hear, their pastoral care these days is very good. And as a Newstead alum, I always take that with a bit of a pinch of salt, just because I know a lot of the girls there, including myself, we were the type of people that would have put pressure on ourselves wherever we went. So yeah, I don't know that Newstead really creates that pressure. It's just that they put a lot of girls that are like that in a confined space, which is tricky sometimes. Okay, sorry, I have seen that question. I will come back to that. Next up, Olaves. So sorry, Newstead, if you have a go, you can just ignore me for a couple of minutes. So stage 1 Olaves is usually in September. Stage 2 is November. Stage 1, maths, English, verbal, non-verbal reasoning. You get 25% of the marks for each of those. Stage 2 is a maths and an English paper. So no reasoning in that, but it includes creative writing. Now, Olaves. Everyone knows it's very hard, the exam. I don't think many people realise quite how hard the exam is. I would urge you not to take the Olaves exam on a bit of a whim to just see what happens, because it's a really, really tough exam. I've said this before, but for our Olaves candidates at this time of year, I am starting to use past GCSE maths papers in my classes. I'm taking some bits out, but that's the level that I'm using with the Olaves boys. According to the old GCSE syllabus, I'm using the higher tier papers, not the foundation tier. So the kind of child that is getting into Olaves is incredibly smart. When I was at Newstead, and I know it'll be the same at Olaves to this day, several of the children, students in my year when we did our GCSEs, several of them were getting the top grades in their subject in the country. So that's who you're sitting alongside every day in class. So that's why I urge you to think seriously about whether Olaves is the right school for your child, just because it's really tough if you're sitting next to children with that aptitude and feeling like you're struggling the whole time. So core skills required, problem solving. The Olaves boys generally, especially by the time of the exam, you can give them basically any problem, like 6-step word problems, and they generally can solve them like that. So they just have a remarkable aptitude for problem solving. And that's logic and as well as math skills. Creative writing skills. The standard of creative writing is extremely high by the time the children do that November exam. So just work on that from an early stage would be my advice. They need to have very advanced mathematical knowledge as well, like I said. Olaves doesn't have a catchment area at all. That does make it more competitive though. So I hear a lot about boys commuting each day from North London, from I think Dover or somewhere like that. So people are coming a long way to go to the school. Reputation and ranking. Olaves has consistently in the last few years been amongst the very top schools in the country. Reputation-wise, I know they took a bit of a hit a couple of years ago. There was stuff in the press, like BBC News and stuff, about them kicking out students after year 12 if they weren't getting the top grades. They've had to overhaul that system now, and they've got a new head. So their reputation has certainly been improving. But either way, it's a tough school. Okay, no one has any questions about that? Go on to Bexley. Okay, so the Bexley test, it's maths, non-verbal reasoning, and what I've referred to here as CEM verbal reasoning. So that's not the type that you get in the typical Bond verbal reasoning, the green books, where you've got letter codes and that sort of thing. It's the kind of, it's synonyms, antonyms, closed test, that kind of content for verbal reasoning. So you can ignore some of the logic type questions, but vocabulary needs to be very good, which is why I've put vocab on there. I am going to open my door because I have a crying dog outside, sorry. Right, so strong vocabulary. The Bexley test, the verbal reasoning part is 50%, the marks are 50% verbal reasoning, 25% maths, 25% non-verbal reasoning. So that verbal reasoning portion will be comprehension, synonyms, antonyms, and closed tests, where you're filling in the missing words into a passage. That's why we really emphasize vocab for that. I've put the link for Wordia at the bottom. The Wordia was partially created with Bexley in mind, which is a range of vocabulary resources that you can use at home, and also vocab classes, just because if your maths and non-verbal can be very good, but you really need to have great English skills for this exam. So you need good comprehension skills, maths problem solving, and you'll need to be able to work quickly. The timing in the Bexley exam is really tough. Mentally prepare your child for the fact that they may not finish their paper in time. That non-verbal timing, they're actually expected to do somewhere between like 2-3 questions per minute. I believe from what I've seen that they're doing that just to really separate the wheat from the chaff, and so that they don't have as many ties, but it does mean that there's a lot to get through in a short space of time. So we've had lots of children that haven't quite managed to finish the non-verbal reasoning paper, and they've still done extremely well, some of them top 180, even with that fact incorporated. So yeah, but work on speed, but be mentally prepared, and make sure your child's not put off the rest of the exam if they didn't finish that one section. Catchment areas for Bexley, they change every year and they vary by school. The Kin Learning Guide to the 11 plus, I'll put a link in the description for this. I've just updated that in the last couple of days with the most recent figures up to 2019, with 7 years of catchment area figures, so you can see how it varies and see whether you are likely to be in the catchment for one of those schools. Remember, once the children have passed, their score really doesn't matter for Bexley. So if you're out of catchment, it's not going to matter that your child is very good and nearly in the top 180. It would be treated the same as just a child that got 30 marks fewer. For the top 180 students, they will be granted a place at the school of their choice without the catchment area being an issue. Bear in mind, though, that's the top 180 out of 6,000 children or so, which works out in the top 3%. So your child actually has a better chance of passing the Olave or the Newstead exam than being in the top 180. And like I said, if your child is 1 mark out of that top 180 score, they're treated the same as everyone else. So it's really all or nothing with that, which is why I don't really recommend hedging your bets and like counting on being in that top 180, because yeah, you can be close, but it doesn't count, unfortunately. Bexley schools reputation, I haven't heard bad things from any of them. They seem to push the students. Students tend to be happy. Ranking wise, they don't tend to do as well as the Kent grammars, and they don't do as well as Newstead and Olaves, but they still do better than most of the comprehensives around. Okay. Thanks for bearing with me, even if your child's not applying to these schools. I'll get into some more general stuff in a minute. But just lastly, we have Kent. So the Kent test contains maths, reasoning, which is both verbal and non-verbal reasoning, and English, which includes spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Now, each of those sections, maths, reasoning, English, is worth 1/3 of the total mark. The children in the Kent exam, this is not the same for any of the other exams, the children have to get a minimum mark in every paper in order to pass. So the pass mark is 320 out of 423. If your child gets 350, so like 30 marks over the pass mark, they still would need to get a minimum score in every subject. So that's why for the Kent, it's particularly important to be a good all-rounder rather than like really good at maths, and then that will make up for the other areas. So comprehension is very important for that. There's less of the synonym and antonym type questions, although those could come up in verbal reasoning. So yeah, work on all areas fairly evenly and make sure that you're not counting on one subject to get your child through. If you're thinking of appealing in that case, by the way, if your child didn't pass that one subject, I wouldn't count on that because I know appeals haven't worked in that case. Then we've got catchment area. So the catchment area for most Kent schools is quite tight. However, a number of them reserve places for people that are outside the catchment area that have scored well. That usually means getting around 390 out of 423. The children tend to find the Kent test easier than they find the Bexley test, which means that quite a large proportion of our students have got over that 390 mark, which gives you admission to a number of schools like Tunbridge, Dartford, that sort of thing. Some years, a good 50% of our students get over that kind of mark. So it's very achievable. We can give you an idea, if your child's with us, of whether that might be realistic for them. But you can get a list in that 11 Plus guide that I will link to. There's a list of schools that would have places for people outside of the catchment area and give you an idea of the scores needed for that. Reputation and ranking, which I've touched on. Sometimes the Tonbridge girls' schools do better than Newstead in the rankings, so they're very much up there these days. And Dartford and Judd, although they don't tend to exceed Olave's performance, they are up there as well in the rankings and with the number of students going to Uxbridge, so they are very good options. Okay, any questions on that just quickly before I go on? Oh, you've got the independence to touch on. Okay, I'll talk about the independence, but feel free to type in a question. So independent schools, a lot of the parents will do this as a backup to the grammar school. So if the child doesn't pass that, then they've got the independent option. It's very easy to prepare for both. So preparing for both the grammar schools and the independents, by the time you've reached the independent exams, which are usually in January, then you've covered basically everything that you need in preparing for the grammar schools, including Bexley and Kent. The only difference is that they usually test creative writing. So you need to be working on that. With some of our students, if the independents are very much a backup option, we won't worry about creative writing until the grammar school exams are out of the way in September, and then we'll turn our attention to creative writing. So for the independents, you need to be a good all-rounder because they're testing all those different subjects. Interview skills are very important because pretty much all of them interview. Don't think there are any that don't. And problem-solving skills are good. Sometimes they'll have activity days where they want to see your child's problem-solving skills in action. Or sometimes the test will have logic-type questions that aren't really straightforward maths, straightforward verbal reasoning. Usually there's no catchment area for them. Reputation-wise, there are a number of good private schools in the Kent, South East London area. JAGS, Eltham, Dulwich all do well. And then Central London, many of the best schools in the country are private Central London schools. So those are very good, but they are extremely competitive. They are more like the standard that is required for OLAVs. Okay. Right, so applying to more than one school, I'm sure many of you are thinking of doing so. Doing both the Bexley and Kent exam is common. Usually the Kent exam is about a week before the Bexley, so I probably shouldn't be promoting this, but as a statement of fact, quite a few parents will do the Kent exam to get a bit of practice before they do the Bexley exam. As I said, the Kent just has that verbal reasoning component that the Bexley doesn't. Other than that, they're very similar exams, and children generally find the Kent exam easier than Bexley. So if you don't mind doing the verbal reasoning as well, then applying for both is a pretty good option. Keep your options open, especially if catchment area is a problem for Bexley, then hopefully you've got some other options at some Kent schools. OLAVs, once you're prepared for OLAVs, because it contains everything, you are basically prepared for Bexley and Kent. So if those are viable options for you, I would encourage you to apply for all or OLAVs plus one other. Newstead, because that's just a reasoning exam, the maths and English wouldn't be covered to a great extent, or to the extent that you would need them to be covered for Bexley and Kent. So if your child is going to do both, just factor in that it is going to be more work for them. With all of these, please make sure that you have told us which schools you're aiming for, especially if that has changed or even your priorities have changed in the time that your child has been with us. What we do in class is very much personalised to the child and the schools that they're aiming for. So if your priorities have changed and we don't know that, then we might be covering the wrong kind of thing in class. So please do let us know. Send me an email if you're not sure that I know which schools you're aiming for. Okay, I think that was all for that slide. So getting into more general points like homework and practice papers. So if your child is in year 5, then hopefully they finished the 8 to 9 books a little while ago. If they've only started with us this year, then they may have some 8 to 9 books to finish, but we really want to get through those like yesterday. So blitz through those if you have any left, and then move on to the 9 to 10 books. I know there are some year 4 parents here. If your child's only 8 to 9, that's fine for now. We'd be hoping they'd be moving to the 9 to 10 books by the end of the year if they're looking at the 11 plus. But don't feel like they're off track or something because they haven't finished the 9 to 10 books yet. I know some people get very worked up about that. Some tutors get very worked up about that. But we're using those bond books just to review as some revision each week. So if they're not on the 10 to 11 or something, don't worry, they're still covering what they need. I'm sorry about him. Okay, so the 10 to 11 books. I'm very sorry. This is not going well tonight. So the 10 to 11 books. The maths and the English bond books I am not keen on. So I would not worry about doing those and move over to practice papers if you're at the point where you'd be going on to those. The reason I'm not keen is because the English is really harder than the standard needed for the 11 plus. The maths has less problem solving in it than the 9 to 10 book. And so then it's better to be working on practice papers or CGP books so the children get that problem solving aspect. If you are ready to move on to practice papers, that's good. This is a good time to start practice papers, but feel free to finish up the books that you've already started with your child. Move on to practice papers. We have a list by school that we save just for our Kin Learning customers. So I believe I've already emailed that, but I will email it again so you can work through that list. If you get through all of those papers early, just let me know. And then depending on the time of year and which schools your child's aiming for, then I can recommend some more. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Just because someone's finished all the practice papers, it doesn't necessarily mean that their child's going to get a higher mark. and you don't know how their child did with those practice papers. Once you do start on practice papers, then I would recommend, I would advise that children be getting at least 80%, moving towards like 90%, 95% by September. If they're getting less than 80%, it probably means that they need to cover a few more basics and we need to step back a little bit before returning to practice papers. So let us know if you're worried about the scores and we will come up with a plan. For Newstead and Olave's, because the papers broadly on the market weren't quite similar enough to the exams, particularly for Olave's, we have one Newstead verbal reasoning paper available to purchase on our website and 3 Olave Stage 2 papers available. So those are online. They're also in the list of practice papers, so they're quite good to do, but closer to the time of the exam, just for some variety. So both of those are based on one, student feedback from previous exams. So when the children come out, we try and ask them if they can remember any of the questions, and the papers are also based on the sample papers from those schools. So we've tried to write some similar questions, but a larger range of them. A tip for those with younger children: if you think your younger child is going to end up sitting the 11+, then the practice papers will come with answer sheets, which I encourage you to use because it's good practice for the exam. The answer sheets, if you photocopy them, then you can put those aside and save them for your younger child to use, because then you won't have the answers written on the question papers themselves, and they can kind of just ignore any rough markings on there. So do that before you make a start on your papers. Okay, any questions? All right. Oh, we need to go on to the next slide pack. 1 second. Okay, it's summer school dates. That's not what I wanted. I need my summer holidays slide. So the next thing I was going to talk about was the summer holidays. Once I've got my slide up. So I may not have it. Okay, we'll go with this slide, with the summer school dates. So someone had asked me for the summer school dates, so those are they on the board. We have sold about 60 to 70% of the places at the summer school. So if you are going to book, it's mid-May now when we're filming this, if you're going to book, then I would definitely recommend that you book now, because they do tend to sell out every year and fill up. Okay, so the summer holidays. This is very important. Please resist the temptation to relax. I know the kids have been working all year or for 2 years for the 11+, but the summer holidays really will make or break your 11+ preparation. There are too many examples to name of just families where the children have been working really well. By the end of July, they are on track. We've just got that last push to do before September. And then they decide that, okay, they'll have a break from lessons over the summer, just take a break from practice papers and stuff. We don't want the children to be burnt out, and we will be keeping an eye on that ourselves as well and advising you accordingly. However, bear in mind there are children that are on ridiculous schedules over the summer holidays for the 11+. I've seen posts about people doing like 8 to 10 hours a day of 11+ preparation over the summer. Now that is not necessary if you're working in the right way. However, your child is going to be in an exam against those kids. So those kids will have been going up and up over the summer holidays and really making the most of that time. And if you take a break over the summer, then typically the children forget a huge amount and they slide back. So it really widens the gap between them and the rest of the students. So after September, like, take a break, stop doing homework, October half term, have a lovely time, but just please keep going through the summer. I cannot emphasize this enough. I will come to that question in 2 seconds. Kin learning parents in the summer. We offer continued weekly classes or twice a week classes. If you want in addition to or instead of the summer school. So depending on what your child needs, some people will do the summer school and then we'll see them for like one lesson in between in the off weeks. Some people will just come for the lessons during the summer or just do the summer school. Different things work for different people. Just make sure your child's doing something. It is important that we see them during that period because we can keep an eye on their rough working out, like their methods, exam technique, and the papers that they're doing, because sometimes we find that children like happen to be on the wrong papers and we need to like change course. So just some sort of contact during that period. If you're going on holiday, I know a lot of people will be making up for lost COVID time and going on holiday this summer, then try and take something with you. I say this as a child that was doing something on holiday before the 11 plus. We went on a long holiday to Ghana. Admittedly, I was traveling with an 11 plus tutor, so it was a little different, but as in my mom, for anyone wondering, that I did a little bit of work in the morning, like one paper. We talked about a little bit. By 10:30 it was over, and then we had the rest of the day to relax, which is how I would recommend doing it, so it's just out of the way. There are lots of ways that your child can learn as well, so I do want them to have fun this summer and do some lovely things, but just get that work in at the beginning of the day. Okay, and I would recommend doing that Monday to Friday, and then you can take the weekends off. Okay, someone's asked, would it be worth practicing the St. Olave's papers even though you're not applying to St. Olave's? It depends on which school. Some of the questions in the Olave's paper wouldn't be helpful for Bexley, Kent or Newstead, because it's like simultaneous equations and stuff, which generally the children don't need to know for the other exams. If you're applying for a private school, then the Olave's papers are kind of handy, especially if you're applying for one of the London private schools. If you've already got them and you're not applying to Olave's, then there are probably just a few questions at the end that I would ignore and then concentrate on the earlier parts. Okay. And then mock tests. There we go. Okay, so answering these in order, how many mock tests should you do? I would say about 3 spread out over the course of the year. We do have a mock test that runs a week or 2 before the exams, right at the end of August. That one is partially for experience, so children get in some last minute exam experience, and then it can also be used as just like last minute tweaking. So perhaps there's an area that we didn't think we needed to work on, and it turns out we did. But otherwise, try and space out your tests. Now, if you don't have to do 3, by the way. If you're applying to like one school, like Newstead, for example, and you weren't doing the others, then 2 would probably be fine. Just one to guide you for a couple of months, and then another one to check in and make sure your child has improved on those areas. If you are doing more than one test and those are a priority for you, for example, you're doing the Olave's test, and maybe Olave's test is a bad example, but Newstead and Bexley, let's say, then you may want to do 4 tests if you really want your child to go to either of those schools, because then you need to be the practice that you do at home and your strategy needs to be guided, and a mock test is a good way to do that. But generally, I'd say 3, maybe 4. Personally, I don't like the children to do more than that, just because it runs the risk of them burning out and getting sick of the tests, getting complacent as well. Complacency is a big thing. And so, yeah, you want to keep a bit of those exam nerves and stuff going into the test, because that will make them perform that bit better and work a bit faster. So which mock should you take, as in which schools? The Kent and the Bexley mocks are very similar because the exams are similar. The only thing is, if you do a Kin learning test, we predict the child's score for that particular exam. So you may want to sit both if you particularly want an idea of what kind of mark your child might get. the predicted marks, obviously there's some variation, but I do have messages every year, and I've still got parents coming back this year that came to us a couple of years ago for another child that have said like they're doing our mock again because the predicted score was like exactly right. So it's a pretty good guide, although there's definitely some room for error, and things change. So if Kent and Bexley are priority for you, then I would do both mocks. If one is a backup and you're not that bothered about it, then I would save your money and just do the one that you would prioritize. So use results to guide your 11 plus preparation at home. Try not to focus on the mark or the ranking if you're going somewhere else. It's important and it's good to know, but make sure that you are developing some sort of strategy after you've got those mock test results. Wherever your child is going for a mock, please feel free to share those with us if we are your tutor. It's always good for us to see which areas they need to work on. Sometimes that will change our strategy. There'll be some surprises in there. So yeah, just don't focus too much on the marks. It's about the strategy and helping you to go forward in the right way. Beware of generic mocks, and go for mocks for the test that you're aiming for. So by generic mocks, I mean there are a lot of places that will have just an English paper, a maths paper, and they'll use that for any school that tests those subjects. Whereas, like I've said, there can be massive variation between the English paper for one school and for another school and the verbal reasoning paper. So just look into it a little bit. Even if a provider says like this is a Bexley mock, often they're just repackaging the papers from another school and branding it as Bexley Kent or whatever, because that's what they know parents want to see. So just dig into that a little bit more. For anyone wondering, at Kin Learning, so we write the mock especially for each of the school, and so we don't do that. And then just note, so a mock should have an element of novelty for the child. A lot of people at the moment are talking about practice papers, or sorry, mocks online, with places like Atom Learning do it, and I think a few others are doing like a weekly mock online. A lot of them are cheap as well, which is nice, and they give you the rankings. Just bear in mind that there should be some sort of novelty in those tests in order to get sort of the real experience. So we've had to do online mocks in the last year, but we've kept that element of novelty by having like an adult there. The children have had to give instructions, the parents aren't allowed to be in the room. Even if you have to go for an online mock, then just having those elements can affect your child's performance and give them a taste of the real thing. So online mocks are fine, but think of them more as a practice paper rather than a mock test, if that makes sense. Okay, and then that was my whole spiel. So are there any questions on either what I've said or anything that I haven't covered with regards to the 11 plus? Feel free to ask questions that are more specific to your situation, your child, because there's always overlap, and a problem that you're having is likely a problem that another parent is having. So feel free to ask that. I do have a couple of questions that people sent in that I'll go into in a second as well. Okay, so how many practice papers should the children do per week? If you're switching to practice papers now, so working through them through the term, then however many however many would replicate the work that you were doing in the bond book. So in the bond books, we usually say a paper in each book each week, so in each subject, the 4, which we expect to take 2 to 2.5 hours. Parents that are our customers do correct me if they take a lot longer than that. So if you've been taking about 2.5 hours for the papers, the bond assessment papers, then do that for the practice papers. So that's depending on which papers you have, that's probably 2 or 3 a week. Those can be spaced out. Do start trying to get your child to do them all in one sitting though, so that they can build up that stamina for the test. Okay, questions that are coming in here. Yes, I will email the practice papers, that's no problem. They'll also be available in our help centre for Kin Learning customers if you need them and you lose the email. Is there a pass score for Newstead? Yes. So the pass score, for some reason it says in the letter that like for the last 5 years, the pass score, the pass mark has been between 220 and 225. It's actually been that for 8 years, maybe longer. So the whole time I've been doing 11 plus tutoring, it's been it's ended up at 220, and that's out of 280. The girls that pass that exam, some of them get full marks in some of the subjects, but they're usually getting about 90% at least in their practice papers by September, maybe higher. Keep the questions coming if you want to. Other questions that I had. Oh, someone asked what kind of mark the children should be getting in the bond books at the moment. So if they are on the 9 to 10 books, then let me get this right. So I would say 85% is very good. I know some of the kids are only making 1 or 2 mistakes per paper, so that would be about 90 to 90, no, 95%. I'm trying to think how many questions are in a paper. So yeah, there are some that are getting about 95% in the 9 to 10 books, some that are doing the reasoning especially and doing very well in that, but I'd say minimum 85%. If it's lower than that, then you may want to figure out whether that's the right book for your child and maybe change strategy, and we can help you with that. Will the summer classes be online or in person? The summer classes, as in the weekly kind, we will have some in person and some online, so that the children that are coming to us online can continue. The summer school will be in person, I hope, if they don't keep changing the COVID rules on us. We're expecting that to be in person at Bishop Justice on Bromley Common, which is where we usually have our summer schools. Anything else? Someone had asked about online courses and whether those would be good to do in addition to tuition. I know Atom Learning is getting very, very popular. They provide videos as well as practice papers. So if you feel like there are some sections that your child hasn't had a chance to cover yet, or if you're struggling to explain something at home, then it might be something to consider. Or if you want to reduce the marking that you're doing at home. However, if you're just looking to reduce the marking, then you may want to look at Bond Online, which is just the online version of their books. I know some people are using it to replace tutoring, which is fair enough. I would say, because of the way that we work with our students, we're constantly personalizing things and we're explaining something in a different way if they didn't get it the first time, and using that like verbal feedback to change our strategy if we need to, which the computer can't do, but otherwise it's nice to have explainer videos sometimes there. Any other questions at all? I'll give it a minute. Okay, I will probably finish up if there's nothing else. If you want to tell me to wait, then please do. Oh, there was a question about the Buckingham test earlier that someone asked. So you were saying that Buckingham test and the Kent test are both GL, then yes, they should be similar. That reminds me, the Newstead test is GL. However, it seems to be quite different in format to the Kent test. So basically GL tests can be different, but I'd say it's pretty broadly similar. Someone's asking about the mock test. So our 1st of June mock test, the next one is now sold out. Are we doing any more before August? I don't know. we're getting a lot of people that are asking. To be perfectly honest, we don't do as many mock tests because I am writing every mock test report myself and putting in individual notes about that child's performance, which other mock test providers don't do. So our reports take a lot longer than anyone else's, which is why I have to be careful about when they're scheduled, because I have to make sure I can get the reports out in time. But if we do schedule any more, then I will email everyone to announce the dates. I'll try and fit one in. Okay. Anything else? Any questions about your child at all? Anything you're worried about with your child? Can be well, without using the names. Okay. I think if there's nothing else, then I shall end the broadcast for this evening. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for your patience amid tech problems and canine problems. I hope this has been really helpful, and yeah, let me know if there's anything else that you need from us. Okay, and I will post useful descriptions in useful links in the description to this in a second, so you will have all of that there for your reference. Okay, see you later. Thank you.